You are listening to Woodland Walks, a podcast for the Woodland Trust, presented by Adam Shaw. We protect and plant trees for people, for wildlife.
Clive Anderson is a barrister, comedy writer, performer, chat show host, presenter of the much-loved Loose Ends on Radio 4, Arsenal-supporting all-round good egg, who, when he is not performing, writing or in court, fulfills his duty as president of the Woodland Trust. He has a love of the outdoors, but has been largely stuck at home and in his garden for much of the lockdown. So, in one of our lockdown special podcasts, instead of me going on a walk, Clive has done all the heavy lifting here and sent me his reflection on trees and the outdoors while swinging in his hammock in his North London garden. So here goes.
So this is my woodland walk, as best I can manage it. I've had to take the idea of woods on your doorstep pretty literally because of the restrictions on where we're allowed to go at the moment. I had to stay in my garden in Highbury in North London. I've got a garden at the back of the house. There are some trees at the front of the house in Highbury Fields, as they're called, so I can extend my walk there eventually. As for the garden, it has got quite a few trees and bushes in it, so with a bit of imagination, I think I can present it as a sort of clearing in a little bit of woodland. Nearer the house, it's paved, and there's a pond, which is good for attracting wildlife into your garden. We've lived here for a little over 20 years, and it already had quite a few trees in it when we got here. The pond had a laburnum tree sort of draped over it. It had divided itself into 3 trunks, each of which was blown over in a succession of storms that have come through in the last 20 years. Sounds a bit of a death trap having a laburnum tree over a pond if you've got a small family of small children, but because laburnums are poisonous and ponds of course are dangerous. But the children of the family who lived here managed to get through it all right, as have my children. Great for attracting wildlife. It used to attract a lot of frogs, with 30 or so of them all piling into the pond, eventually producing bucket loads of frog spawn. The last few years that doesn't happen anymore. Now the trees. What trees do we have? Well, I've mentioned we lost a laburnum, we lost a ceanothus, and a couple of summers ago we lost there was a lovely flowering cherry. It used to dominate the top end of the garden, at least for the 2 or 3 weeks when the blossom was there, and that just gave up the ghost a couple of summers ago. It lives on, sort of, in the form of a couple of bowls that we got a wood turner to turn the wood into. Beautiful cherry wood, but it's no longer here, and that's allowed for a wild cherry, which I planted from one of those little saplings you get at the end of a Woodland Trust event. I planted that a few years ago. Hasn't literally stepped forward, of course, but it's now much more obvious at blossom time. This has grown into quite a substantial tree. It's along with some others, it's probably a little bit large for a small garden. It's shot up. I'm quite used to planting trees here and also in the West Highlands of Scotland, and I can tell you that trees planted in London grow, I think, at least twice as quickly as ones in the West Highlands. There's a very thin dividing line between planting trees in the West Highlands and feeding the deer, but even if they escape from the deer, the wind and the rain, temperature and the soil quality, I think it's more of a challenge for trees. There we go, wild cherry here. It's now got lots and lots of whip-like branches, which at blossom time get covered with great voluminous sleeves of flowers. The pigeons come and land on them and bounce up and down in the wind. But in addition, in the garden we have a hammock in the hot months of the year, and I hang it from 2 trees. One is a tulip tree, and lying back, I think we're all fairly convinced the skies are bluer this year with fewer aeroplanes, less traffic. Skies seem less polluted, lying in a hammock, I can look up through the leaves, characteristic lobed leaves, lobes with little points on, of a tulip tree, backlit from the sun, looking up at the blue sky. The other end of the hammock is on a silver birch tree. Somebody once said, or I read somewhere, it's a sort of rite of passage to become a middle-aged or even old man, is that you should have planted at least one silver birch tree. So I've done that. Next to that, there's a loquat tree. This was in the garden when we got here. I see them everywhere now, in front gardens, on the street, in squares. But it's a bit like when you learn the meaning of a word. Oh, I hadn't come across that. And then you start hearing it everywhere. So I must have. So same with loquats. I must have been seeing these. They've got big laurel-like leaves, big leathery leaves, which they're evergreen, and they drop a few every day onto your lawn just to let you know they're there. Of course, with lockdown, I'm a bit more often in the garden. I can sweep them up or pick them up straight away. Big leathery tree, producing, well, obviously loquat fruit. They're like small apricots. Maybe everybody knows this. I don't know why it came as such a surprise to me. I must have been seeing these trees for years without realising it. I looked them up. They originally come from China, grow well around the Mediterranean. And the first 2 or 3 books I found loquats in said, well, the fruit doesn't really ripen in England. But this one certainly does. I don't know if it's the global warming that's taken over. You get a good crop every year, I think. You don't always get to eat the ripe fruit because squirrels, the grey squirrels, which there are in abundance in a London garden like this, they like loquat fruit as well. So they seem to take them when they're less than fully ripe. But if you pick them early enough, you can get enough for a few pies, tarts every year. And we've also got a quince tree, which is kind of the opposite way around, has rather delicate leaves, I always think, on a quince tree, and the delicate, large but not very robust looking blossom on a quince tree. But when the fruit comes, of course, it's enormous, heavy, chunky kind of quince fruit. Now, I did plant that myself. I had a couple of goes at that. Planted in the wrong place first of all, a bit too shady, but it took transplanting. So I've mentioned squirrels. There's plenty of other wildlife here. At the bottom of my garden, there's a corkscrew willow, and lying back in my hammock, I can look up and see a squirrel's dray, large bundle of twigs and other matter forming its dray, and I can look into the next door neighbour's garden, and there is a magpie's nest, rather similar looking construction. And they've been busy this year raising their young. Very similar looking homes, magpies and squirrels. I don't know why magpies call their home a nest and squirrels call their a dray. I've got in the more woody bit at the bottom of the garden, I've got another native species there, which is a crabapple tree. And I've planted a couple of mulberry trees. I remember, quite a few summers ago now, going to an event involving the children, high summer, and we ended up finishing underneath a mulberry tree. And it's absolutely loaded with fruit, which we could pick from the tree and eat. And mulberries don't travel well, I don't think. So in order to have mulberry street, you really have to have a tree. So I planted a couple, and it does produce, they both produce quite a lot of fruit, but usually in the high summer, and almost every year in August I'm in Edinburgh for the festival, so I've not had much experience of enjoying my own mulberries. So maybe this year, when the Edinburgh Festival is not taking place and travel generally is going to be highly restricted, maybe this is the year for me to enjoy my mulberries. A very small bit of silver lining for the dark cloud of the virus which has taken on the whole world. So that's the look of my garden. I'm not a very systematic gardener. I got interviewed once about my approach to gardening, and I ended up being quoted as saying I like to think of myself as a natural gardener, which makes me sound as though I'm a sort of born to be Alan Titchmarsh or something. What I meant by that is that I like to make I'll keep the garden as natural looking as possible, so it looks as though it's almost like a proper bit of countryside, in this case sort of woodland. And I think, and other people just say, well, you're just not looking after your garden very well, but I think I've sort of achieved that, in that we have these trees and bushes. On the ground there are bluebells, which I've planted, but they've naturalised themselves and spread. Later there'll be foxgloves, which is almost my favourite plant. It takes quite a lot to convince me that something is a weed that has to be taken away. In the middle of it is a patch of woodland. There is a lawn. Again, it's a bit like a silver birch. Per man of my age, you have to put a bit of concentration into having a lawn. There's plenty of wildlife comes to the garden. I've mentioned the magpies, which you seem to be more and more of at the moment. Not supposed to be good for other smaller birds, but there seems to be plenty here. We get magpies and crows, which might be bad news for more garden-like visitors. We get plenty of great tits, blue tits, wrens, blackbirds. I'm still not quite sure that I understand why, but you don't get sparrows anymore the way you used to. Can't all be because people have put lots of decking down in their gardens or tidied things up. It's a mystery. When I was growing up on the edge of London, almost all birds seem to be sparrows, but you hardly see any anymore. What's the reason for that? In addition to the squirrels, we get foxes. They don't tend to live in my garden. They must be living in neighbours' gardens. They don't live here because of I've got a dog. I've always had a dog. I go for terriers, who seems, even the one I've got at the moment is called Albert, who looks almost exactly like a fox. Knows it his duty to chase them away. But dogs are quite sporting about their chasing habits of foxes. Certainly my ones have always been. The dogs I've had have always, when they've seen a fox, have been determined to chase them, but in a very sporting way, tend to bark at the top of the stairs to say, essentially to the foxes, coming, ready or not, and chase down the steps. Plenty of time for the foxes, or for that matter squirrels, to get away. So we've never caught a fox, and probably just as well. I'm not sure I'd enjoy the prospect of a fight between a terrier and a fox. So I'm lucky, along with other garden owners, to have somewhere to be, in the sunshine, in the fresh air, in the midst of a pretty natural feeling setting, to have a garden attached to my house, and it's come as a very welcome thing to have at this time.
Thank you for listening to the Woodland Trust Woodland Walks. Don't forget to subscribe to the series on iTunes or wherever you're listening to us, and do give us a review and a rating. And why not send us a recording of your favourite woodland walk to be included in a future podcast? Keep it to a maximum of 5 minutes, and please tell us what makes your woodland walk special. Or send us an email with details of your favourite walk and what makes it special to you. Send any audio files to podcast@woodlandtrust.org.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.